When Tony Montana saw Elvira, he was fascinated. The problem? She was the partner of his boss, a drug lord. But this didn't stop him. His unrestrained ambition, limitless and unscrupulous, drives him to consume everything. Women, money, and power. Tony Montana is not a role model, he's a warning. At an immigration checkpoint in Miami, a line of refugees eagerly waits to start a new life in the United States. Among them is Tony Montana, a Cuban man with a scar on his face and big ambitions. During the interrogation, Tony explains that he got his scar fighting as a child. The agent points out a tattoo on his hand, identifying it as a prison mark that signifies killer. Tony admits he was in prison but claims it was for buying dollars. The agent doesn't believe him and orders him to be taken away. Tony resists and, before leaving, explains why he left Cuba. They tell you what to think, what to feel. They watch everything you do or say. Do you want to be a sheep like everyone else? Work 10 hours a day for nothing? I got tired of eating octopus and wearing broken Russian shoes. Tony is sent to an overcrowded refugee camp, classified as an illegal immigrant with an uncertain future. At the camp, Tony reunites with his friend Manny, who proposes a plan. Get green cards in exchange for killing Rebenga, a Cuban political enemy who is also in the camp. Driven by his ambition, Tony agrees. He creates a riot as a distraction and eliminates the target, earning the green cards as a reward. Once freed, Tony and Manny start at the bottom, washing dishes in a food truck. Frustrated, Tony feels this is not the American dream he imagined. From the truck, he observes a group of elegant people and points to a woman, wondering what the man accompanying her has that he doesn't. Manny responds, for starters, style, elegance, and a lot of money from white powder. Tony, angry, says he shouldn't be chopping onions but collecting gold. Moments later, Manny introduces Tony to Omar Suarez, a drug dealer working under Frank Lopez, who had ordered Rebenga's elimination. Now, Omar offers them another job for $500. Tony, ambitious, is offended by the low pay. After a heated argument, Omar agrees to give them something more lucrative, $5,000 for buying 2 kilos of white powder from Colombians, warning them that if they lose the money, the boss won't forgive them. Here we can start analyzing Tony. Tony came to the U.S. fleeing Cuban communism, having grown up in poverty and repression. This likely shaped his defiant and reckless nature. He called others sheep, reflecting a grandiose image of himself. He sees himself as a man destined for greatness, a leader above the rest, which might explain his sense of invulnerability and obsession with achieving power, status, and recognition. His past in prison, the tattoo marking him as a killer, and the scar on his face, clearly from violence, show that he had a criminal inclination from a young age. These details reveal someone aggressive and impulsive, willing to do whatever it takes to get what he wants without questioning the means. Additionally, his short stature in a hostile environment likely fueled his confrontational and aggressive attitude as a way to compensate for a possible disadvantage. After leaving the refugee camp, we saw Tony frustrated, washing dishes. This moment was key because, just as he expressed his dissatisfaction, he observed men accompanied by attractive women and wondered what they had that he didn't. At that moment, his desire to occupy their position intensified. Why? Because when an aversive stimulus, like his frustration at washing dishes, is followed by an attractive stimulus, such as seeing those men enjoying power, elegance, and female company, the desire becomes even more irresistible. Seeing those men in a position Tony covets, while trapped in his own disappointment, makes his desire to reach that place skyrocket. At that moment, Manny pointed out that what those men had was elegance and money from white powder. That comment seemed to solidify an idea in Tony's mind. To reach the place he associates with power and masculine success, he needs money. But Tony is impulsive and unscrupulous, so he wants it all immediately and understands that white powder is the fastest way to get it. That's why, moments later, when presented with the opportunity to get involved in a shady job, he not only agreed without hesitation but also ensured he maximized it. Tony and his friend Angel enter the hotel for the deal while Manny and Chichi wait in the car. Inside, the apparent hospitality of the Colombians quickly fades during negotiations. Things escalate and the Colombians hold Tony and Angel at gunpoint. Hector, the leader, demands the money, but Tony challenges him. Hector mercilessly uses a chainsaw to kill Angel in front of Tony. Manny and Chichi, noticing Tony is taking too long, go to look for him just as the Colombians are about to kill Tony. They arrive in time to save him and eliminate the threat. Hector tries to flee, limping down the stairs, but Tony chases and kills him in the street. They finally manage to complete the deal, securing both the drugs and the money. However, this success creates tensions between Tony and Omar, who wanted to take credit for the operation. Tony challenges Omar and decides to deliver the goods directly to Frank. Frank's mansion, full of luxury and power, impresses Tony. Frank, impressed by Tony's work, welcomes him and Manny, raising a toast to them. He tells Tony he needs brave men like him by his side and advises him to stay loyal to climb quickly in the business. At that moment, Elvira, Frank's wife, appears, and Tony is immediately captivated. Later, Frank takes them to a nightclub, where he offers Tony to work with him and Omar, promising him elegant clothes and ambitious plans for the next month. During the evening, Elvira wants to dance, but her husband refuses. So she asks Tony, who agrees with Frank's approval. While dancing, Tony tries to talk to Elvira, but she tells him she doesn't want to befriend someone who arrived on a banana boat. Tony pretends to be a political refugee to impress her. Angry, Tony tells her she's an attractive woman everyone desires, but it seems like she hasn't had intimacy in a long time. Defiantly, Elvira responds that it's none of his business. Tony tells her she'll be his, but to give him time. Elvira makes it clear that even if she were desperate, she would never be with him. Back with Manny, Tony tells him he's sure Elvira likes him because the eyes don't lie. Manny warns him to be careful and not forget they were caged a month ago. Tony replies that he wants to forget that and take over the world. Where could Tony's attraction to Elvira have come from? When he met Frank, he was fascinated by the luxury and opulence of his mansion, a world Tony dreams of conquering. At that moment, Elvira appeared, and Tony found himself in a similar situation as when he washed dishes and envied elegant men with attractive women by their side. Now, the question arose, what does Frank have that he doesn't have all this? The answer, more money which brings more power. This further intensified Tony's ambition, and Elvira became the trophy woman, a symbol of the success and status he craves. With her blonde hair, like gold, represents the wealth he previously said he should be collecting. In his mind, winning hair means taking Frank's place, gaining control, and being recognized as someone who has it all. 3 months later, now established in the drug business in Miami, Tony and Manny try to flirt on the beach but are rejected. Tony tells Manny they first need money because money brings power, and power gets women. Later, they pick up Elvira in a Cadillac to take her to the racetrack with Frank, but she scoffs at the car and refuses to get in. Tony takes her to a shop to choose another car she likes, and she picks a Porsche. Tony orders Manny to pay for it and take a taxi to the racetrack. Tony and Elvira get into the Cadillac. While she consumes white powder, Tony asks her to pass him some. Tony tries to kiss her, but she pushes him away, saying she doesn't get involved with servants. He puts on Elvira's elegant hat, making her laugh and strengthening their connection. It's time to talk about the white powder because it's one of the most addictive and dangerous substances. Let me explain. Our brain produces a chemical called dopamine, which makes us feel pleasure and motivation. It's released when you do something you enjoy, like eating your favorite food or receiving compliments, but usually in moderate levels, enough to make you feel good but not extreme. White powder, on the other hand, increases dopamine levels by 5 to 10 times more than any natural experience could. The intensity of pleasure is unmatched by anything natural. The problem is that these abnormally high levels of dopamine are more than the brain can handle. To adapt, the brain responds by producing less dopamine naturally and reducing the number of receptors that process it. And as a result, everyday activities that used to be enjoyable no longer are, and the person begins to rely on white powder to experience pleasure, needing larger doses over time. Eventually, Tony's decision to start consuming white powder will become one of his biggest mistakes, playing a key role in his downfall. Later, I'll explain all of this in more detail. That night, Tony visits his mother and sister, Gina, at their humble home, a clear contrast to his new life. Gina, excited, welcomes him with joy. Tony, dressed in an elegant suit, gives Gina a necklace and announces that their mother will no longer work as a seamstress nor Gina as a hairdresser because he can now take care of them. He hands them $1,000, but his mother is suspicious of its origin. Tony insists that his work is legitimate, but his mother doesn't believe him. She scolds him for tarnishing the name of hardworking Cubans, calls him scum, and demands that he stay away from them, especially Gina. Gina steps outside to apologize to Tony and tries to explain that, since their father left, their mother, but Tony interrupts, saying they never had a father. Gina continues, saying she knows Tony has done bad things and had trouble in the army, but she clarifies that she doesn't judge him. They embrace and Tony gives her the $1,000. Manny, meanwhile, notices Gina and is immediately attracted to her. Tony notices Manny's interest and angrily warns him to stay away from his sister. Frank sends Tony and Omar to Bolivia to meet with Alejandro Sosa, a powerful drug lord seeking partners. Tony's bold attitude impresses Sosa, who agrees to negotiate a major deal, far beyond what Frank had approved. Omar, upset, explains that he needs to return to consult Frank. Sosa agrees but asks Tony to stay. Shortly after, Sosa gives Tony a pair of binoculars, showing him how Omar is thrown out of a helicopter, revealing that he was an informant. Sosa then forms an alliance with Tony but warns him never to betray him. Back in Miami, Frank is furious about Omar's death and Tony's decision to expand the operation without consulting him. Frank doubts they can come up with the $5 million needed upfront for the product. Tony tries to reassure him, claiming that if they're short on cash, he could quickly generate millions on the streets. However, Frank points out that moving so much product would cause conflicts with other traffickers, as it would invade their territory. Tony, annoyed, says he doesn't care about competitors and is willing to eliminate them if necessary, which unsettles Frank even more. Here, we can see signs of the impact white powder has on Tony's behavior. As I mentioned earlier, dopamine isn't just linked to pleasure but also to motivation. When dopamine levels spike drastically, a person experiences excessive confidence, feeling as though they can accomplish anything. Additionally, by overstimulating the reward system, white powder creates an urgent need for immediate gratification, contributing to impulsiveness and a total lack of consideration for consequences. From the beginning, Tony Montana showed great self-confidence, an unbridled ambition for wealth and power, and a lack of scruples to get what he wanted. But his use of white powder has intensified these traits to dangerous levels. The substance has given him extreme confidence and an exaggerated sense of invulnerability, leading him to suggest risky and poorly calculated ideas, seeking immediate results without thinking about the consequences. But this is only the beginning. His consumption will increase, and with it, his behavior will become increasingly destructive. After their argument, Frank confirms his fears. Tony is uncontrollable. He questions Tony's trust in Sosa over Omar's alleged betrayal and suggests that Tony and Sosa might have conspired to eliminate Omar and facilitate the deal. Frank insists on postponing the expansion and reminds Tony that loyalty is key in this business. He warns that those who chase everything, luxuries, women, champagne, don't last. But Tony, ignoring the advice, shows clear disdain for Frank, who now sees him as a threat. Tony meets with Elvira and tells her he no longer works with Frank. He confesses his humble origins and lack of education but highlights his ability to navigate in high society. He asks if she likes children, and she replies that she does. He comments that this is good because he likes them too. Then he tells her he wants to marry her and for her to be the mother of his children. Meanwhile, Frank contacts Mel Bernstein, a corrupt cop on his payroll, to plan how to eliminate Tony. Tony goes to a nightclub with Manny and, to his surprise, sees his sister Gina dancing with another man. When he asks who it is, Manny explains that it's Fernando, one of Lucco's men. At that moment, Mel Bernstein approaches Tony to extort him, revealing that he knows about the failed deal with the Colombians at the hotel. Tony deduces that Frank ratted him out and agrees to pay Bernstein for protection. Soon after, Tony sees Fernando taking Gina to the bathroom. Furious, he bursts in, beats the man, and scolds Gina, threatening her not to return to the nightclub. She protests and he slaps her. Manny intervenes and takes Gina home. On the way, he explains that Tony still sees her as his little sister and protects her as if he were her father. For Tony, she is the only good and pure thing in his life, and he doesn't want her involved with people like Fernando. Gina asks why Manny never invites her out. Frustrated, Manny tells her that he considers Tony like a brother and that the two of them could never be together. Tony's overprotective and paternal attitude toward Gina could stem from his father's abandonment during childhood, a fact that clearly marked him. It's likely that from a young age, Tony assumed a fatherly role, taking care of his sister and trying to compensate for that family void. Now, as an adult, as Manny said, Gina represents the only pure thing in Tony's life, someone he seeks to protect at all costs from his criminal world. This makes him extremely controlling, especially regarding the people who approach her. His father's abandonment could also be behind Tony's strong desire to have children. This was hinted at when, before proposing to Elvira, he asked if she liked kids. Tony wants to be the father he never had, someone who cares for and protects, someone who is present. This ideal will later lead him to make a decision that seals his fate. Meanwhile, Tony, trying to calm down, sits at a table, unaware that two hitmen are watching him from the dance floor. Suddenly, the hitmen open fire with machine guns, causing chaos in the club. Tony is injured but not seriously. From under the table, he shoots and kills the attackers before quickly escaping in his car. Tony, along with Manny and Undersur, decides to confront Frank, suspecting he is behind the attack. They plan for a friend to call Frank at 3 a.m., pretending to be one of the hitmen to inform him that the attack failed. In Frank's office, They find him and Mel Bernstein, confirming Tony's suspicions. Frank, nervous, tries to act surprised about the attempted murder and promises to find the culprits. Tony doesn't believe him. Then Tony takes the head seat at the table. At exactly 3 a.m., Frank's phone rings, and his reaction confirms his involvement. Cornered, Frank admits to planning the attack and begs for his life, offering everything, even Elvira. Tony gives the order and Manny kills him. Then, Tony turns to Bernstein, who tries to justify his innocence, but Tony doesn't believe him and kills him too. As they prepare to leave, Manny notices that Frank's bodyguard, Ernie, is still in the room and offers him a job. Tony assumes control of Frank's organization and marries Elvira. His deal with Sosa progresses without complications, making him the sole distributor of Sosa's products. This generates millions of dollars and allows him to build a multimillion-dollar drug empire. With his newfound wealth, Tony buys a luxurious mansion with strict security. However, power, money, and white powder begin to take their toll. Tony grows paranoid, asking Manny if he recently checked the house because a cable truck has been parked outside for days. He believes it's the Diaz brothers watching him, although Manny doesn't take it seriously and reminds him of the high security expenses they've made. Additionally, Tony begins to push away those around him. Elvira, once captivated by his charm and ambition, now feels trapped in a life of empty luxuries. As Tony obsesses over his power, she turns to white powder to escape her reality. Their marriage quickly falls apart. In an argument while Tony is in a jacuzzi, they insult each other. Tony calls her a hollow brain, and she accuses him of only talking about money before leaving. With the massive cash flow from drug trafficking, Tony looks for ways to launder it. Manny suggests working with a banker named Seidelbaum and offers to handle negotiations. Tony rejects him dismissively, calling him a mini-partner, which enrages Manny, who storms off. Alone, Tony concludes that he can't trust anyone and doesn't need anyone. Why has Tony become so paranoid, distrusting everyone? You might think it's because of his position, but is it really just that? Neither Frank nor Sosa, despite being in higher positions of power, showed similar behavior. Here, we see another effect of excessive and prolonged white powder use. Besides dopamine, white powder also increases norepinephrine levels, a chemical that activates the fight-or-flight response, leaving the body and mind in a constant state of alertness. As a result, the person becomes distrustful, always defensive, and over time may develop paranoia. In fact, it's estimated that between 8% and 84% of people who use cocaine experience paranoia as a side effect, a state where irrational suspicions and constant fear make them believe others want to harm or betray them, even without real evidence. As Tony's consumption of white powder has increased, so has his paranoia. He has begun to distrust even the people closest to him, which will eventually lead him to commit one of the most terrible acts of his life. Later, Tony decides to launder money through a real estate company, unaware that it's part of an undercover operation. He is caught and arrested. Although he pays a $5 million bail to get out, his lawyer informs him that he could face 5 years in prison, reduced to 3 with good behavior. Manny suggests accepting the sentence, but Tony, refusing to return to jail, proposes bribing high-ranking officials. However, the lawyer warns him that the video evidence makes it impossible to avoid the charges. Later, Sosa invites Tony to Bolivia to discuss a problem with an activist investigating his operations. During the meeting, which includes several government officials, Tony realizes his lower position within the larger scheme. Sosa, aware of Tony's legal troubles, offers to resolve them if he kills the activist, who is about to publish a report exposing Sosa's drug trafficking and connections with officials in Bolivia and the United States. Tony agrees but, before fulfilling the mission, returns to Miami. During a dinner with Manny and Elvira, Tony, clearly intoxicated, begins questioning whether everything he's achieved really has meaning. He reflects on the sacrifices he's made and wonders if they were worth it. Then, he lashes out at Elvira, calling her rotten, and accusing her of being unable to have children. She retaliates by calling him a degenerate, throwing her drink at him, and reminding him that he's no better, as he sells drugs that destroy lives. She also tells him he wouldn't be a good father if he can't even be a good husband. These words push Tony over the edge. Finally, Elvira decides to leave, declaring that their life together is a disaster. Tony achieved everything he ever wanted: money, power, and a beautiful woman. But upon reaching the top, he ended up more empty than ever. His marriage was unhappy, he was consumed by paranoia and addiction, and he was completely alone. What seemed like success from the outside was a disaster from within. Tony forgot something fundamental. Getting what you want doesn't guarantee happiness, and sometimes, it can even be one of the worst things that can happen to you. Philosopher Slavoj Zizek explains this well. According to him, we don't truly want what we think we desire. What drives us isn't achieving what we want but the process of wanting itself. Desire, Zizek says, doesn't seek satisfaction but rather to stay alive. Desire only wants to keep desiring, and when you base your happiness on achieving specific goals, you inevitably end up disappointed. Why? Because when you get what you wanted, the excitement that kept you moving forward vanishes. This isn't just philosophy, it's backed by science. Studies on, yes, our dear friend the dopamine, the chemical that makes us feel good, suggest that it's released more during the anticipation of achieving something than in the moment of actually obtaining it. It's that feeling of being on the verge of reaching something that truly excites us. Surely you've planned a trip and realized that imagining and organizing it was almost more exciting than the trip itself. That's the nature of desire. It motivates us, but it never fully satisfies us. Then the key to a fulfilling life is not simply achieving goals but having something to fight for, feeling like you are making progress toward it, and when you achieve it, finding something new to desire. It's a never-ending cycle, and the important thing is that the journey has meaning. The problem with Tony was that his goals were hollow. Money, power, and the appearance of success, but without a deeper purpose. When he got everything, he was left empty, with no what's next. Reality hit him hard when he realized he had sacrificed too much for something that didn't give him the happiness he expected. This is the trap of boundless and scrupulous ambition. It consumes you and those around you. You push away those you love, you cause harm, and when the satisfaction of achieving your goals fades, you are left with the question: was it worth getting what you wanted if it meant losing what mattered most? Tony travels to New York with Alberto, Sosa's trusted man, along with Chichi and Ernie, to eliminate the activist. That night, they plant a remote-controlled bomb in his car. The next day, while following him, they discover that his wife and daughters are also in the car. This stirs Tony's conscience, and he decides to cancel the mission. Alberto insists on continuing, but when he is about to detonate the bomb, Tony refuses to harm a mother and her children and shoots Alberto in the face, killing him instantly. This decision of Tony proves to be a grave mistake, as the activist is now free to publish his report on Sosa. Back in Miami, Tony asks about Manny but is told that he left without warning. Furious, Sosa contacts Tony and reminds him of his warning not to betray him, swearing vengeance before abruptly hanging up. Tony's strong desire for fatherhood may explain why he couldn't eliminate the activist along with his family. The presence of children in the car triggered a moral boundary that Tony wasn't willing to cross. For him, children symbolize something that must be protected. Seeing them reminded him of the vulnerability he experienced growing up without the father figure he longed for. Since Tony aspired to be the father he never had, someone who would care for and protect, hurting those children would have meant betraying that ideal, a psychological blow too strong for him to endure. In the middle of the chaos and under the effects of several lines of white powder, Tony visits his mother, who tells him that Gina has left and she doesn't know where she is. She also expresses her disappointment and blames him for the damage he has caused since arriving in Miami. Tony goes to Manny's house, seeking help to find Gina and talk about his problem with Sosa. When he arrives, Manny greets him, and Tony is confronted with an unexpected scene. Gina appears happily at the top of the stairs, revealing her secret relationship with Manny. Filled with rage, Tony shoots Manny in the stomach, leaving Gina horrified. As she runs to Manny, she tearfully reveals that they got married the day before and were planning to surprise Tony. But it's too late. Manny dies. Ernie appears, warning Tony that they must leave because of the gunshots. Tony and Ernie leave with Gina. With everything I've previously explained about the effects of white powder, it's easier to understand what led to Manny's murder. Under the influence of the substance, Tony is already in a state of extreme alertness, predisposed to react impulsively to any perceived threat, real or imagined. In this context, when Gina, whom he obsessively protects and considers the only pure thing in his life, leaves home without telling him where or with whom, his paranoia spikes even further. Additionally, just before this, in a critical moment after killing Alberto, Tony expected Manny to be there for him, but Manny had left the mansion without warning. In Tony's paranoid mind, this only fueled his distrust of Manny. That's why, when he found Manny and Gina together, his impulsive reaction makes sense. Considering his altered mental state under the influence of white powder, Tony sees Manny as a threat to Gina, as their relationship brings her closer to the world Tony had been trying to shield her from. The paranoia and mistrust he felt toward Manny turned that scene into an intolerable personal betrayal. In his state of hypervigilance, Tony loses the ability to reason. He no longer sees Manny as his friend, but as a danger that must be eliminated. And so, without listening to explanations or thinking about the consequences, he makes the decision to shoot. Back at his mansion, consumed by guilt over killing Manny and overwhelmed by his problems, Tony sinks further into his white powder addiction. Trapped by regret, he suffers a panic attack. While trying to calm himself, Gina, devastated by the loss of Manny, confronts him with a mix of accusations and provocations. She insinuates that his control over her is because he desires her, but behind her words hides a fatal purpose. Gina shoots Tony, wounding him in the leg. At that moment, Sosa's men storm the mansion. After eliminating the guards, one of them reaches Tony's office and shoots Gina with a submachine gun, killing her. Reacting quickly, Tony pushes the assassin into the void, and he falls into the pool. Sosa's men invade the mansion, killing everyone in their path. Tony, holding Gina's lifeless body, sees on the security monitors that they've taken over the house. He witnesses Chi-Chi's death and, filled with adrenaline, grabs a rifle with a grenade launcher to confront the attackers. Although he is hit multiple times, he fiercely eliminates several enemies. From the top of the staircase, he insults and challenges the remaining attackers, who take cover from the explosions. Finally, Sosa's men regroup and attack him with a hail of bullets. Gravely wounded, Tony remains standing, fueled by the effects of the drug, until an assassin sneaks up behind him and kills him with a shotgun blast. Tony falls over the railing and lands in the pool. The camera shows his body floating next to a statue with the inscription, "The world is yours," symbolizing his rise and fall. Characters like Tony Montana are admired by many. Perhaps it's his ability to rise from nothing and build an empire, his audacity to face any adversity, his guts to take risks, or because he symbolizes what many desire: power, respect, wealth, and attention from women. But what many forget are the high costs of his lifestyle. The same methods that brought him to the top also led him to lose everything. Tony didn't just end up with nothing. He ended up worse than he started, losing the most important people in his life as a direct result of his own actions. Tony's story reminds us that methods matter. If the ways you pursue your ambitions lead you to act without thinking about the consequences, make impulsive and selfish decisions, and put your desires above everything and everyone, it's likely you are building a path to self-destruction. If those methods distance you from your loved ones, put those who should be safe with you in danger, or cause you to mistreat others, then you need to stop and ask yourself, is it really worth it? Tony believed it was all worth it, but we already know how his story ended. He is not an inspiration, he is a warning. Ask yourself, do the methods you use to achieve your goals bring you closer to the happiness and meaning you seek, or do they pull you away from what truly matters? Because if you follow a path like Tony's, you could end up like him, with nothing, no one, and bearing the weight of having destroyed what mattered most. Unlimited ambition is a double-edged sword. It can give you much, but it can also take everything away.
To you who made it to the end, thank you so much for watching the entire video. I also want to thank you for all your support and remind you that if you haven't subscribed to my channel, do it now. It would really help me a lot. That way, you also ensure you don't miss any of my videos. Without further ado, you and I will see each other in the next video.